made a number of works. 2 years ago I left to become a freelancer again. I guess distort the human body and create a sense of something that maybe that we are in, or something that emanates from us. What was really interesting for me was that there was this sense of something emanating from the body itself. There was this sense that we could feel and sense that we affect the space around us, it affects us. And what this system was able to do was, in a very imaginary way, show the capacity of that. And also that there is this other sense to ourselves, this much more organic or animalistic aspect to ourselves, that somehow really came to life under the system. In 2004, I went to this conference where I was giving a talk about an installation I'd created for Acme when it was quite new. And I met this person, Frida Weiss. And this person is an engineer from Bosch Engineering, a German company. And he's very much, at the time, was involved with quality control systems for components on production factory lines. And basically the technology that he developed with his team were a series of video cameras that could look at components without humans having to do it, and look at various anomalies and be able to then give a report on any kind of problems. Not very sexy stuff, but incredibly technically complicated and worthy. But Frida also played in a band, and his girlfriend at the time was a dancer, and he decided to take some of this equipment out of the Bosch factory and turn the cameras onto bodies, and also try to get this system to respond to sound and music. And so what he was able to achieve was taking real-time movement, putting it through video algorithms, and then create very responsive images that are just literally responding in real time. Well, not in real time. There's a bit of latency, but it's so small that we don't really notice it. And so I was very excited about that because I wanted to work with video as lighting. And so I invited him to Melbourne, and we had, I guess, a play session. That's what I call a play session, because there is this sense that it's not really aimed at a final outcome, that there is a client and there's a product that needs to be looked at. It's really about what can your work, how can your work speak to mine, and how can I speak to yours. And so we had this kind of big extended 2-week kind of play date in my studio here at Chunky Move. And in the mid-20th century, this is pretty much, began to advance into sort of larger, more fancy things as technology improved. But relatively, it's very similar. Again, using types of costuming and projections to create this sort of sense of otherness. And what I was sort of faced with in the early part of the 21st century was pretty much the same problem that was happening at the beginning of the 20th century. There was no difference. And the problem was that we're basically working with pre-rendered images. And it basically means that a relationship between performance and pre-rendered images is about dancers, actors, performers of various types having to be in the right place at the right time. This is not really a collaboration in a sense. It's not really working, we're not really being responsive, it's just well rehearsed. And from that, we decided to make what eventually was really a solo piece called Glow, and it was performed flat on the floor, looking down, and so it meant that the dancer didn't have a bottom of screen, a bottom of frame. The dancer was free to float in a weightless sense on top of the floor. And the audience would sit all around looking downwards, and we particularly liked performing it in areas where there was mezzanine floors where people could really have very steep angles looking down. And it went for 25 minutes, and it was really, really interesting and popular, and we travelled around the world with it and had kind of great success. But my producer said, look, only a few people can look at this, and it's 25 minutes long, and couldn't you kind of think about doing a big show on stage when lots of people can come and go to festivals and things? So I thought, okay. And so we decided to make Mortal Engine from this initial idea. What was interesting, what was sort of happening in Glow was that in the coding there was some kind of noise, and there were artifacts and anomalies that created these kind of ghosts in the machine. The particles started to kind of happen sometimes, and we never kind of dwelled on them, and the aim was to try to fix it, because Glow was quite simple. But I thought there's something quite beautiful about these sort of semi-autonomous life forms in this digital world that are living with these dances. Why don't we crank up the noise in the system and actually use that as an input source and make that part of the work itself? And so, as you saw, Model Engine has a more kind of organic sense to it. So there's a kind of a virus that sort of inhabits that world a bit from that noise. The problem with, and this is Frida, and I was given his name first, and I thought, ooh, South American lady artist that I could possibly work with. No, German techno geek. But a lovely, lovely man with a great sense of humour. And one of the problems when you collaborate with different art forms is that the process of making them are very different. They require different needs, and one of the biggest things is different time frames. So I'm not a person from the world of coding, and some of you may be either be involved directly or indirectly with coding, but so you may know that coding has its own time world, and it's very elastic, and its elasticity has got nothing to do with real life people. I think because choreography, similar to filmmaking or theatre, to make anything happen, you have to work with a team of people in real time. And so you have to be a socialised human being. Otherwise, nothing happens. With coding, it's a little bit different. It's kind of like, it's a very isolated world. And it's a world where it's a very complicated, intense world that someone has to go into a state which what Frida calls, and other programmers I guess call, a flow. And that flow can just has a kind of a world of its own. I won't bang on about it. We actually got along quite well at the end. But we had to develop systems of how do you actually work together, because to solve one little simple thing on stage, which looks simple, in the computer world might not be simple, or it might just take a very long time. And so collaboration, one needs to also learn, I guess, kind of scheduling and communications that actually function. And so coding happened a lot at night and happened a lot in the evening, and then we thought we'd work for 8 hours a day together, and in fact it was only useful to work 1 or 2 hours a day to bring those things together, and then we needed all that time to sort of work apart. To make the work now a much larger work, I didn't feel it was enough just working with Frida, and I brought in the beautiful Robin Fox from Melbourne to work on this piece, and he's a great sound, visual arts, works a lot with laser beams, and we incorporated lasers. Interesting here, we were able to use the data from moving dancers to actually manipulate the laser in real time. And we also incorporated the work of Ben Frost, composer, who's also originally from Melbourne but lives in Reykjavik now. And he has this beautiful quality with some melodic music that has these clouds of distortion that kind of come in almost like the weather and kind of obliterate it and then reveal something else when they lift. What we needed and what we found was a common language across, I guess, sound, light and movement. These three forms were able to communicate in real time to each other, so we could actually get sound interpretation from movement through sound files, through video files. We could get video of what sound looks like. That's not completely new if you've got screensavers that play sound visualization. But in the end, it was really not so much a dance performance and not a music concert and not a light show, but somehow a combination of all three that made it quite a unique event. But working with computers, I have to say, drove me crazy after about a couple of years. And the number of inexplicable problems that the digital world has when you try and do a live event is very stressful if you've ever done those kinds of things. And this was a very big thing. So in another conference I actually went to and had a talk and had a listen to, I met this guy, Ruben Margolin, and he's a kinetic sculptor. He actually started as a mathematician at Stanford, and then switched to English, I think, and then ended up in visual arts, and that's where he is now. But he's one of those compulsive obsessives, a bit like a computer coder, but he's able to direct that towards good instead of evil by working with, essentially kind of 18th century loom technology from the sort of Industrial Revolution. And so what he does is he works with hundreds and thousands of strings, and he works basically in a mechanical fashion by creating these incredible suspended sculptures that give you kind of waveforms or kind of organic, almost movement in nature, but completely building it mechanically. And I thought, well, dance is a very analog thing, and so is this guy's work, so let's work together. And so Ruben and I spent some time in his studio, or his workshop, his garage, in Berkeley. He lives in California. And we began with him tying me up with a whole lot of strings and slinging them up over these rails, and then them to bits of paper and wire. And I started sort of moving around like a puppet, and these kind of inanimate objects would respond directly in real time. And I thought, well, we're doing the same thing here. We're taking information from movement, we're tying strings to them, and we're using that information to interpret that by these kind of large decoding machines. They are able to, through this sort of artistic practice, we're able to see, or at least imagine, things that we cannot see when we're looking at the human body. And yet we know that they are coming directly from that body. So we came to Melbourne and we did some serious play, connecting strings to dancers. And I thought this was going to be really simple, but immediately it runs into kind of really sort of finely detailed calibrations, down to the millimeters. The other funny thing is that Ruben is still he's an imperial guy from the US, and so it was an extraordinary thing about working to the millimeter in inches, which I just found kind of insane, but we got over that. And we finally ended up with, again, something different, but sort of similar to Mortal Engine, I thought, which was this large-scale capacity to see something that is sort of externalized from something that may be internal, and working simultaneously. So that was also quite successful, and we travelled around a bit, and we did a tour of the United States with it. And then I realised I was really tired of digital coding, and also really stressed by 18th century loom design strings that were so finely calibrated, and had to hang 220 strings, every night, when we moved to this, to the, I can't remember what it was, like 5/16 of an inch to blah, blah, blah. So, but what I did love about the experience in this was the scale of the image, which I could never have as a choreographer working with a dancer. And the outcome by combining these sort of decoding machines of humans was very seductive. So being a choreographer, how could I dispense with this technology and just work with people to create that? And I thought, well, what about lots of people? What about a big crowd of people? And that way I can get this massive size. And if there's no technology and lots of people, then what about just using the human voice for sound? And then I thought, what if these people who can, everyone can shout and scream, but what if these people could also sing and bring out this sort of sublime element of voice? And so I thought, what about a choir? Because they're an organised bunch of people, and they can be a rabble, but they can also be something that's, very, very beautiful and assembled. thing. So I worked with a lot of volunteers, and I realised after working for 30 years in what I do that working with amateurs, which is, I guess, working for the love of, really reconnected me. And so finally what I realised, what I was interested in was, when I thought about amateurs, I thought about professionals, and I thought about, highly virtuosic dancers on stage, and the relationship between untrained audiences and these skilled people. And I started to think about the relationship, and I thought making a work where a lonely audience member is invited to join in the show. And so this led me on to folk dancing, and this is Sydney Dance Company, I think at the Sydney Theatre, and it was also here at Melbourne Theatre Company, where an audience member from this came up and started talking to them and dancing with them. And it took me really far back to when I was a child, and I realised I actually began dancing in folk dancing because I grew up on a kibbutz in Israel, and that was my kind of early dance experience, which I never really paid much attention to. And so now I've become, I guess, more focused on just everyday people and the possible intersection of dance in their lives. And so recently I made this film based on a play that I did for Sydney Theatre Company, I Want to Dance Better at Parties, which was on ABC 1 Tuesday night, if you managed to see it. It's on iView for the next week and a half. And so it really engages with, I guess, people of everyday life and stories. So I do have a 90-second video. Should I just skip that, do you think? No? Okay, let's just watch this teaser and then we'll finish up.
I was hyperventilating. It was like death had come to me. I didn't know how to deal with that, but there was no escape from it.
Hello, my name is Philip Rose, and I was just ringing up to inquire about the dance lessons that you provide.
So, what inspired you to get into contact with us, Philip?
Yeah, I get lonely. I think it's a fact of life when you miss someone. Loneliness is all around.
Do you want me to copy what you're doing with your arms?
Oh no, don't worry about your arms, Philip. They'll be wrapped around me. Okay?
It's sensual, and it does create a dilemma, I suppose, emotionally, how you deal with that. And at times you have to remember that that's the case. At the end of an hour of a dancing lesson, you say goodbye and you go home.
No, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I didn't sign up for that.
I know, you just want to dance better at parties, but it's practically a party. There's drinks and dancing.
Well, who do I dance with?
So, in the end, I was thinking, so what does this all mean? And for me, I guess, trying to surmise all this different stuff is that creative outcomes evolve through a series of ongoing questions answered in part by every work you make. Inspiration doesn't visit, well, at least it doesn't visit me. And artistic outcomes are born of research, collaboration, and questions. And it is the works themselves, or most of the works, that set off a chain of dialogue or information or impetus for the next work. That's the only inspiration I know. So, thank you very much.